So all of those factors, I think, combine to make engagement of growing importance to any authority, and Ealing is no different. I think that's something which has been recognised by the council's new administration. Members who were at full council on Tuesday for the council plan being adopted will have noticed the strong focus on the intention to make Ealing more open, transparent and inclusive, including through resident engagement. That's certainly, as an officer group, a very clear message that we've received from the new administration, and reflects, I think, the importance of this issue. In terms of the framing your kind of inquiry tonight, I think that gives us really important context, because it means it's a live issue for the council, and an opportunity for Scrutiny to really work alongside the development of the council's thinking, which is to be welcomed. The report suggests, and I think Mel Stevens' paper will kind of expand on this, that it may be helpful to start with some work, on definitions around engagement. So a phrase and a word, I think, that means different things to different people and in different contexts. Broadly speaking, I think we and most of the literature recognise a kind of hierarchy of participation. That's often set out from inform, a kind of traditional broadcast provision of information, through consult, involve, collaborate and empower. In the paper, we draw your attention to the LGA's definition. It's at paragraph 1.6 in the paper. They do the same, but have kind of slightly shortened and condensed that into inform, consult, co-produce and citizen power. And I'll come on just to say briefly a bit, I think, about how Ealing works under some of those headers. It's worth acknowledging that, activity can achieve multiple of those goals at the same time. If you share or retweet or view something that's shared on the council's social media channels, you are being informed as a resident, but you're also engaging with it in a more active way. If you post a comment and so on, than you would perhaps if you produced, consumed the Around Ealing magazine or consumed news via broadcast. Similarly, you can do at the higher end of the spectrum, you can achieve multiple goals. But recommendation 1.9 in the paper suggests that it may be helpful, having heard the various inputs quite early in the panel's work, to come to an accepted working definition of engagement. Do you agree with that hierarchy of participation and the meaning ascribed to the language that the LGA, or indeed any of the other definitions and frameworks included in the paper, to help guide and focus and evaluate your assessment of the council's performance as you move through the inquiry? So that's one kind of recommendation to bear in mind. The paper also gives a brief overview, and we will certainly go into this, I think, in more detail in the communication session, around the context and the diversity that Ealing is operating in. But we felt it was helpful to include some acknowledgement of this at this stage. So factors such as language, the diversity of languages which might be a first language for Ealing residents, and particularly where written comprehension may be lower outside of English. Online access, almost 9 in 10 have access to the internet, but people's confidence in performing different tasks is varied. And particularly, there are groups, a significant group, perhaps 10% or just over, particularly amongst older and some disabled groups where internet access is not the norm and people don't have that confidence. Of course, we need to consider preference in terms of where people go to access information, particularly where they trust to access messaging information and to take the step towards engagement. So we think that's been key for us in terms of our comms and engagement strategy over the last 16 months or so in terms of the COVID-19 response. Our benchmark data is a little bit dated because Ealing hasn't run a resident survey since 2018 due to financial pressures. But at that time, Ealing benchmarked well on a national basis for the way people were satisfied with Ealing running things, believing we provided value for money, and around people being informed about council services. Just under half of people, though, said they felt they could influence decisions in the area, which does perhaps suggest we were performing better at the lower ends of the hierarchy of participation, and that may be something we wish to explore, and happy to go into any more detail that we may have. Figure 2 in the paper sets out a brief, and it is brief and kind of selective overview of some of the types of activity that the council has delivered against those areas using the LGA framework. So a summary of the comms channels, which you may be relatively familiar with, that we've used under the informing areas. So around Ealing, the main website, the Ealing News Extra website, our social channels, our weekly Ealing News Extra bulletin that goes to over 100,000 residents, and traditional and digital outdoor advertising and leaflets. So we've got a broad range of channels that we can access, and I think one of the things you'll want to explore looking at the scope is the effectiveness, the usage, which ones perform particularly with particular audiences. If we think about consulting, again, the council has some common tools that it often uses through consultations, surveys, online and physical, focus groups, drop-in meetings. Picking up Councillor Driscoll's comments, the council has utilised the Commonplace platform recently during the LTN consultation that provides additional engagement functionality for residents to drop a pin, to comment, and we've used similar technology, for example, through the Talk Future Ealing budget consultations a couple of years ago. At the moment, the council's procured Built ID, which is another digital engagement platform, and plans to make greater and more systematic use of that going forward. There are lots of other examples of consultation and engagement that the council delivers, be it via the planning system, the resident balance or estate regeneration, the ward forums, which you have historically held, and via other channels such as the voluntary sector. And as we move up the hierarchy of participation, then I think it's fair to say the council has got examples of how it's worked and supported different aspects. So we actively support volunteering, the community managed libraries, both in delivery and the development of the proposals. I think it's a good example of the co-production model where the council has worked with the community to create solutions. And some members will know there's an ongoing engagement exercise around Northolt. And at the citizen power end of things, the empowering, the enabling people to just get on and do things, we have, of course, the Do Something Good website aimed at facilitating community projects, connected, like-minded individuals in the community with others who want to do things, to fundraise, to initiate. We've built on that approach through the Ealing Together response to the pandemic, working with our voluntary sector partners to create and support them to deliver services. We've done it in a service delivery context with the creation of the Ealing Parks Foundation. And we are increasingly trying to support community-led groups with shared priorities, for example, the Lagercan group, and also Act for Ealing on climate change. So I think the point to land is that the council recognises that hierarchy and has delivered activity across it. And you may want to explore those perspectives and those examples. I wouldn't for a moment suggest that the council has done everything it needs to do in this space. I think the framing I gave at the outset, the priorities of the administration clearly show that's not the case. And one of the things, probably the second recommendation in this paper, which is at 1.18 or figure 3, is that one thing it could be helpful for the panel to do as it embarks on its year of scrutiny would be to discuss, deliberate and complete the self-assessment engagement matrix, which is at figure 3, which asks or proposes that for each of those types of activity, that hierarchy of information, consult, co-produce, citizen power, you might make an initial assessment of how much we do this. Does Ealing do this regularly or infrequently? And how effective are we? Are we good at this? Do we need to build our capabilities? Clearly, things we do regularly and we're good at are strengths to build on. Things we do infrequently and are poor at would be areas for development and so on. We thought it might be helpful for members to draw that baseline, which then, having explored the more detailed sessions over the course, would frame your inquiry, and also may give you a baseline to assess at the end of the year whether those initial perceptions, engagements felt right, validated by the evidence you'll gather, and to help form the framing of your recommendations. There is some material in the paper about both how we evaluate, particularly communications activity, which again is a theme we can explore in more detail, and the legal context, particularly for consultation. When the council is engaging on service change, we're very free to act in whatever way we wish to, and can really generate some, a wide variety of ways of gathering that feedback. We can, of course, be creative and flexible whilst we are formally consulting, for example, on a service change, and the use of digital platforms, as mentioned, is one way of doing that. There are others which I'm sure Mel will give us more evidence on. But we are at that stage we have a higher bar to ensure that we are engaging with what are known as the gunning principles, which guide how consultation specifically should be conducted, to ensure that it's done at a formative stage, that there's sufficient information for people to give an intelligent and informed response, that it's done with adequate time for people to respond, and that the council makes time to actively consider the responses before the decision are made. So you can see those are not insurmountable barriers to get over, but it is important, I think, to recognise, therefore, when we're informing, when we're consulting, when we're engaging, and so on, so that we apply the appropriate tools within the appropriate framework. I was going to stop there, Chair. I think you indicated you were going to take questions after the second presentation. So thank you, members, for your time.
Thank you, Officer, for your report. And now I will invite Mel Stevens to do her presentation. Mel, over to you.
Hi everybody. People that I haven't said hello to yet, really lovely to be here back at Ealing. I joined for a little while doing a bit of work with Kieran a couple of years ago now. So I do have some slides that I'm going to share with you, if that's okay. So I'm just going to share my screen. And talk you through, just put that on presentation mode for you. I don't need to talk through all of them. That's going to go. So I don't want to hold up questions and answer session, but there are a couple of few things that I thought I would touch base on. So I work for an organisation called Democratic Society. I'm their Director of Programmes and Practice. And I'm fortunate enough to work for an organisation that's sort of spread across Europe. So I get to go and play in participatory projects all over the place, which I'm very happy to talk to another time over a cup of coffee, but lots of stories and lots of great examples, and also lots of stories of things where things have probably not gone as planned, and things which we've learned from. But there are, of course, many great things, and in, like I say, in the line of work I'm in, I get to see some really incredible stuff. I think Kieran sort of indicated in his chat just then about, how much change we've seen over the last decade, particularly in democratic decision making at the local level. But, at the end of the day, I guess the challenge is, are we seeing this increase in engagement really, is it ultimately transforming the way we tackle and achieve positive outcomes for some of our really critical issues? We see lots of engagement happen in lots of different places, but a lot of it is very fragmented. It's stop-start, it's duplicated efforts. You can go to a local place and there's many different things all happening in different ways. So it can be very confusing for residents and citizens. It can be very confusing for local authorities, and it can be costly, and it can waste time and energy. I think that the real message that I wanted to get across is it's really easy, and we all do it, that you go for the method. Like, let's do something. What should we do? Let's do a survey, let's do a consultation, let's do a co-design process. Process and the doing bit is the bit that we can often get excited about. But ultimately, it's really important to actually consciously design based on purpose and outcome. So what is it you're trying to achieve in the long term, and what's the goals and the rationale for doing it? And once you really understand the goals, and once you really understand what it is that you want to see happen, then you can work out what's the best way to achieve that. I think the other thing that often gets overlooked is context. And by context, it can include things like how ready you're for you. So say there's a great idea to do something that's in the kind of at the top of that hierarchy that Kieran talked about, empowering. How ready are people? What's the history of engagement and participation in that place? What do people remember? What's happened previously about that same topic? Libraries is a really good one, and I know you've done a lot of work with your community managed libraries, but there's a lot of history around engagement in libraries in different places, and people have memories and they remember if things seem tokenistic or nothing happened at the end of it. So that's a really important factor that you need to consider in. Kieran did talk about the hierarchy of engagement, and I am going to make a little comment about that. So on the left, I think the reason why we use the word hierarchy a lot is because there is a model called the ladder of participation that's decades old now, and its kind of whole belief was that at the very bottom were things around informing and consultation, and that partnership working, co-design was better, and that ultimately empowering was the best that you could achieve. And I don't really agree with that. I find the word hierarchy quite tricky, because it pushes people to a method rather than actually that conscious design of really assessing and understanding what's needed. And we've all experienced, or you would have heard, from other places and in the press, sham engagement and participation can happen at any level. It's about the honesty and authenticity that makes it work. And I think the other thing that makes things work in participation engagement is the informing bit. So really being clear, really providing accurate information, and being honest in all of the different types of activities around participation is fundamental. So it's not at the bottom. I think it's central to making it work. I guess the challenge is where do you want to be? And I know that you're working on this, hence why you've got this scrutiny working group. And I know that you're in the process of setting out your ambition. I also know in Ealing from the stuff that I've seen and the stuff that I've been involved in before, that you're doing loads of really good deep connections in communities, Northolt being an example of that. I think what often can trip us up is this fog in the middle. And when I say fog in the middle, I sort of mean the structures and processes that don't necessarily respond, the kind of, the pipe work within the organization that might sort of in a way and unwittingly disconnect decision makers and communities. And I guess the challenge is through the work that you're doing, how can you find the ways to kind of connect those up, to join those conversations, to join the things happening in small local communities, the things that residents are already doing with the work that you're progressing. And here is a very technical looking image, and I'll just quickly explain it. It's kind of trying to show that way that you need to, you know, if you're really taking it seriously, how can you embed participation within yourselves as an institution? And first and foremostly, you know, it's about community leadership. It's about the role of elected members as being the spearhead for that participation and for community and resident engagement. It's members' roles that enable and kind of support active citizenship in their places. The other thing is obviously around systems leadership, and by that I mean your senior officers, you know, the internal harmonisation about what this really means as an organisation, as a local authority. And then the third line there, the ways of working. It's just, and I think you've just sort of highlighted that this is some of the work that you're going to be doing, possibly through your benchmarking when you're exploring comms and other processes, is what are those processes that you already have in the organisation that are a bit resistant, that actually almost act like a barrier, or when there's something happen are the sort of the no points, and what are the ones that you've got that support and enable and make that kind of glue and liquid and dynamic engagement really thrive, and using this as an opportunity over your next, you know, 6 months to a year's work to really highlight and showcase the enablers that you already have within, I think is a really good way to champion it. So the danger with that diagram that I just showed you is that it's all very technical and it really forgets the heart and soul of what this is all about. And quite simply, it's the bit that I'm passionate about. It's about people, it's about your places, and it's about lives. It's about relationships. It's not about the data, you know, in that way. And that's why what the work you're doing really matters. So, you know, I say the challenge of, you know, what is good resident engagement? I think we all know when we're having a positive engagement. We know when we're in an engaging conversation, when you're feeling that there's something genuine and real happening. So we know what it feels like. And I think it's really the challenge of bringing that feeling into your work and how you plan and conduct the resident engagement, and imagining that stuff for the people that you're working with. I'm just going to give a very quick highlight of a couple of case studies, and I'll explain why I've pulled them out. So this one is in Calderdale, which is in Halifax, the area of Halifax up north. So in Calderdale, the council wanted to, you know, and there was a time when all councils were saying we need a new social contract with our residents. So that's what that was their aim, their outcome, their purpose they wanted to achieve through a process of resident engagement. The challenge to them, and my provocation, was that meant a different relationship, and actually that meant a different power dynamic. So when they were thinking about their engagement, it was really hard for them not to be controlling the agenda of what the conversations and the engagement were about. So we worked with the officers, worked with the councillors, but also with some community groups to collectively together create and design some ways that they could have conversations and activities that they could do that was shared materials and shared assets for all the community, and that the council even simply could go onto a listening sofa without a set of questions, but just to listen, just to talk, and just to start building relationship. And it's really interesting how sometimes these very things that seem the most simple and not innovative and cutting edge can really shake things up and bring about some really creative and valuable outcomes. The other one is Romsey. So Romsey, the work I did with Romsey, I got involved for running a citizens' assembly for Romsey for their master plan of their town centre. So it is an area with high tension, lots and lots of consultations, and a lot of disagreement amongst residents about what should happen. So the reason why I'm highlighting this one is because you can sort of see from the timeline that the Citizens' Assembly wasn't separate and in and of itself. We worked really hard to understand what value it can have and how it could sit in a master planning process. So how does public consultation, how do other kind of workshops and activities, how does, with a beast like a Citizens' Assembly and other master planning formal processes all fit together? And what was really, really brilliant was that each piece fed into the next piece of resident engagement. So you could see the way that public consultation fed into the Citizens' Assembly as pieces of evidence, how people from lived experience, different groups, focus groups, groups that were using potentially different buildings that may or may not be replaced, could come to the assembly and share their thoughts, their experiences, their ideas. And then also how the recommendations from the assembly could then go back out to public consultation and inform the final master plan report. What's really interesting is the master planners, Nexus, the organisation that did that, went on to win a national award for resident engagement. So it shows that it can actually really cut through really difficult issues. This one, I know I'm doing it very quickly, but I'll just quickly carry on. This one was where it didn't quite work. So Frome Town Council, quite famous for reinvigorating democracy, a thing called flat pack democracy, where all the councillors decided to all stand as independents to remove party politics from what was sort of, you know, stopping progress happen in terms of their political decision making. So it was known as a cutting edge innovative town, and they wanted to do something with their grants process. They already run participatory budgeting and had money aside for that, but each of the councillors had their own sort of, you know, grant pot that they could allocate to different areas in the town. They wanted to really think again about the process of the grant giving process, how it worked, how they made sure that it was more inclusive, look at the different sort of types of beneficiaries, who was successful, who wasn't successful. So decided to do a co-design process. However, rather than get people into the room and say, this is what we want to do, could you work with us and redesign a process? They brought people together, sounds a bit silly in a way, to co-design the co-design. So rather than myself, say in an organisation like DEMSOC, do all the working out and run a workshop where people did the co-design, it was getting the participants themselves to kind of design the workshop, facilitate, host it, and bring it together. What was really fascinating and had to be worked through over the sort of process was that the people weren't ready. They weren't even ready to do co-design. The people who had been successful and unsuccessful weren't yet in a place where they could reimagine a different grants process. So what we had to do was kind of go away and rethink about capacity building, supporting a group of people to be in a place, if they wanted to be in a place, to do that piece of work. So I think it's a really good reminder not to kind of just make judgments about what people do and don't want to do. And then I think this will probably be my final one, is the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. And the reason why I've brought this one to, I mean, there's nothing innovative about a listening forum. You know, happen many of these types of events with councillors, you know, in their local communities, meet with their residents and listen. The reason I'm talking about this one is because of the context. So the context in this case was everything. So this was after the awful Grenfell Tower fire, during the huge amount of hurt, anger and trauma for residents, but actually also for the council staff and for the elected members. So the work in this case was really about building confidence of the cabinet to go out into the public and have some really difficult conversations, building confidence of residents, particularly in North Kensington, to listen to each other and also listen to the response from the cabinet and the leader, and a willingness to create a space for a willingness for people to come together and have some of those conversations. So it was a very, very difficult scenario. And I'd say over time, they absolutely managed to tackle their fears and be in the room together and really listen to what was being said. Just one quick point on going online, just to say it absolutely works. It really works. Don't underestimate the time of prep and thinking that you need to do. I think the other thing that going online really has demonstrated over this last year and a half is how inclusive it is. What was really interesting, I think, kind of, before COVID, was the fear of doing things digitally because it could exclude people. And we found really the opposite. By doing things online, we have different people take part. People are more willing to take part. There's something they feel safer in. They're in their own homes. It's easier. Do have to provide skills and training. You have to do things slightly differently. We've had to provide laptops and equipment to people. We run training sessions. But the transformation that you can achieve from that, there's a chap here in one of these pictures, an older chap, probably the oldest one there, big smiley face. He'd never used a laptop or a tablet or anything in his life. We gave him a laptop, gave him training. He took part in 8 online workshops. And through that, he was FaceTiming, communicating with his family, doing things that he'd never been able to do before. And there's just those little stories when you can just see how digital can really bring about some change in people's lives as well. Won't talk to that one. I think the thing to just say is that doing it well and being really open and transparent and genuine can really have an impact on participants as well as the outcomes you're trying to achieve. And it can also have make a big difference on how people trust the council. So this is a little bit of data from a piece of work we did with Ada and Worthing down on the south coast. And the numbers up the top, the 70, 58 and 33 were like our baseline. We did a survey with participants, and then at the end of the engagement activities, we did the same survey. And you could, obviously those numbers could drop and people were on a high from doing everything they've done and the way that the council responded to the recommendations and what happened. But I think the fact that, from 33% of people thought the council listened to 61% was, a dramatic increase in a period of a couple of months. I'm going to just share a quick video, if that's okay, because I don't want it to be my words that leave you at the last word. I want it to be a word of some residents from Waltham Forest.
That bit doesn't seem to be working, so perhaps you move on to the next slide.
Did you play the video?
Can I just check? Are people?
Yes, sure.
I've just stopped that because I think I was getting a message saying it wasn't working.
Yes,
Yeah, I think you were trying to play the video. It wasn't playing.
Okay, I'll put the link in the chat, and then you can look at it at your own time. It's a really, the message in it is really important, because actually what the residents who take part talk about is actually about democracy being done differently and their role in that, and how much they valued the council and the work that the council did, as well as the work that they did in doing that. Sorry that that didn't work.
Okay, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. Now we will move on to the question and answer session. So please raise your hands, and all the panel members, whatever questions you have regarding the officer's report and this presentation. And if you think your question has already been asked by somebody else, then please do not repeat the same question. Just for the sake of asking it, we are conscious of time and we want to give opportunity to everybody to ask interesting questions. So who is the first member who want to ask question? Are there any questions from the panelists? Councillor Steed, then Councillor Driscoll. So yeah, go on.
Okay, Councillor, thank you. Can I just ask Kieran Reid, if I may, initially, Kieran, if I may call you Kieran as opposed to Mr. Reid. 2018, you said there was the last survey, resident survey. Can you give an indication as to how much these resident surveys cost? And is there any chance of there being a future resident survey? I can't hear. I can't myself. Yeah, I can't hear. Kieran.
No, sorry, Councillor. I was having some problems coming off mute. It would obviously depend on the size of the sample that we procured. So the method we used last time was a random telephone sample. At different times in the past, we've used samples between I think 1,500 and 3,000 residents. Obviously, the more we ask, the greater the granularity by area, by demographics, etc., that we could break that down to. I haven't got the exact cost in front of me, but I think the range for sort of something like that would probably be, depending on the size of the sample and the number of questions and the length of the survey, would probably be between probably about 30 and 60,000 pounds, depending on which set of choices we made. So there isn't any permanent budget for that held centrally, but money, it has been possible to do that in the past. So I wouldn't rule out it happening again. But at the moment, there isn't a plan to commission a resident survey in this financial year.
Okay. May I come back, Councillor Anjum, about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, just briefly. I can't remember, Kieran, how often they were done. Was it every 2 years or?
Yeah, I think it's changed over time, Councillor. Certainly in the time I've been here, the target was to do them every 2 years. Obviously, we had COVID last year, so it would probably be quite difficult anyway to run one. Yeah, but I don't think they've been annual probably for the best part of 10 years now.
No. Okay, thanks for that. That'll do for now. Thank you very much.
And now, Councillor Driscoll.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose just reflecting on what Kieran said and what Mel has said, there's some things that struck a chord with me. I mean, my first council meeting was my local ward forum meeting in the Walpole ward, and it probably was one of the most unpleasant meetings I've ever been to, where older men shouted at other older men And then they shouted back at each other. And I thought, why am I here? And it was deeply unpleasant. I contrast that with where I live just 2 streets outside of the Northfield ward, and I am a councillor in Northfield, and the ward forum meetings there are light years apart. There's a cohort of very steadfast attendees, and very often I can almost name all of them. Not absolutely all, but a good chunk of them. And there's a general sense of cooperation and people suggesting ideas. There's some people disagree, and that's fine, but the whole atmosphere is just very different. So I think our methods of how we do ward forums, I've seen as this great consultation device, when actually they can be very polarizing, or they can be very productive, but they tend to attract a certain cohort, tends to be older, tends to be regular attendees, and doesn't really penetrate to any great depth in a ward. So I think Northfield is supposed to have quite a good attendance, and it might get 80, 90 people attending out of a population or electoral roll of about 12,000 or thereabouts, 11,000. So if you just think about how representative that might be. I think one of the best things we did in the ward forums in Northfields was discuss traffic, which seems a bit ironic now that we're talking about LTNs, and my declaration is that I live in and close to an LTN area, but this is pre-LTN times, and it was one of our most productive consultations because we gave a limited number of maps of the area we were talking about, and people had to plot their thoughts and ideas, and we deliberately gave a limited number so that people had to share and talk with their neighbour. And then we sort of had a plenary discussion, and actually it was really positive, lots of ideas and lots of things. So I think how ward forums can be used can be good, but we have to have something that attracts people and gets them engaged. But that meeting about local traffic issues, we delivered 3,000 leaflets and had 80 or so attendees out of 3,000, and we were talking about their streets and their roads. So it's kind of interesting how we're trying to get to engage. And I think we need to, I mean, talking about how we inform and how we put in context that Mel mentioned, I thought was really good, because often a lot of what we do and consult on, for example, planning, is restricted via national rules. So although we ask for comments and we ask for contributions to a planning application, explaining that it's not solely the council's ambit to decide on that, and we have to actually judge it against some regional, national, local rules, not just opinion of neighbours local to a plan. I think often people misunderstand, so informing and giving that context is really important, and that can be across the whole board. But I don't think we should be downbeat in terms of the consultation models that we do have. The livable neighbourhood in West Ealing has all sorts of different types of consultations, from exhibitions and meetings, some different innovative digital ways of contributing through scanning a lamppost and then making a comment then. So I think we've got lots of options that we can draw upon within our own borough. But I think we need to get more context and information out there and have that so people know the scope and the impact. Everybody can contribute that they want their streets cleaned, but if we say that your street cleaning budget represents probably a matter of a few weeks of our adult and children's services budget, they're trying to make that judgment on our competing demands on our budgets is very difficult to convey that. So having that context for what we're operating in, I think is really important, so people understand that bigger picture. And that's quite a tough sell to give people that understanding and informative information. I've got quite a few other thoughts and ideas, but I think I probably said enough at this point, so I'll pass back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution, Councillor Driscoll. Yes, Kieran, do you have any comments?
I mean, Joanna may want to come in because her team have provided the support to the ward forums. I mean, I'd certainly agree with Councillor Driscoll's observation that we have got lots of good examples of innovation in the borough to build on. The livable neighbourhoods, I mentioned one or two others. So whilst we're looking to improve, I would agree with the the sort of statement and the intention to do that positively and confidently and engaging. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from Kieran or Mel? Okay, yes, Mel, you want to speak?
I was just going to do a little response as well to Councillor Driscoll, because it's great to hear, in terms of a good functioning ward forum. I guess the question is around who's not going, and if it's only a ward forum, who else isn't being reached then? So it's understanding, I guess, in Northfield, what else is going on and how do they fit together, and are there particular groups or types of families or individuals that are just kind of not being included, and that would be the thing to explore, I guess. And then the other thing I think is around, so that was in terms of the inform and context is fantastic to hear that. Lots of councillors and lots of different local authorities maybe it's not proactively avoid that, but they don't want to necessarily share the bigger picture and the context and increase understanding of what's going on. So it's not always as straightforward, I guess, for a variety of reasons. So again, a tricky one, but an amazing ambition and fantastic to hear.
Thank you, Mel. I can see 3 more hands. Councillor Brett, then Councillor Gallant, and then Councillor Mahmood.
Thank you, Chair. So I kind of got a couple of thoughts and questions. One was to Kieran, just on the last resident survey. How many people actually took part in that out of the kind of proportion of the population? You might have mentioned it, but I didn't catch it.
Do you want to respond, Kieran? Your mic is mute.
Sorry, I'm having a slow, sticky button. I will look up the exact figure, Councillor, while we're on the call and put it in the chat. I can't remember off the top of my head if the sample was 1,500 or 2,000 residents. In any event, it was selected to provide a sample which was representative of the borough's population at a borough level, and would allow, with a much wider confidence interval, so wider kind of margin of error, I suppose you would say, at the 7 town centre level. But I'll check the exact figure and put a link to the results in the chat, if that's okay. I don't want to give you the wrong answer.
Fine. It's just I think it kind of sounded much more positive outcomes than I would have expected, to be honest. So that's why I was quite interested in the sample size. Sorry, not being downbeat, but just from observations as a resident and now as a councillor. So yeah, that's just quite interesting. I'd be just quite interested to hear about that. And then it's just kind of a general thoughts around our communication, because to residents and stakeholders, the perception, whether it's correct or it isn't, is that, on the ground, people are quite fed up, and they feel like they're not being listened to, and they feel like they're not being communicated to. They're basically being told that things are going to happen. A prime example of this was the libraries consultation, where we had like various meetings. It felt quite last minute, so people kind of only suddenly found out about them. So I think that we probably do need to look at, the kind of tick box stuff. So I've worked in comms for various organisations, and the thing that we always used to have was like, oh, okay, so we've used this channel, that's fine, we've ticked all the boxes. But actually, a lot of that communications hasn't actually reached the people it was supposed to reach. So there's kind of that element that I think we do need to really be a lot more hot on now, especially given we've got to change in management, but also, there has been significant negative feedback on some of the consultations. LTNs, we could be here all night talking about that, but we've got LTNs, we've got the libraries, we've got the Gurnell, so there's quite a few myriad of issues, and then also the planning stuff. So again, there's something missing in our communication strategy at the moment that I do think needs some serious work. And it's not a criticism of what we're doing. I think, all of the stuff that's being spoken about tonight is all positive, but there's definitely, there's something, a piece of the puzzle is missing when it's getting down to the ground level. And myself, I'm a new councillor, but I very much don't like shying away from the facts and the figures, or the realities of what's going on. But at the same time, you've also got to look at how residents feel. Like, I'm dealing with an issue on one of the roads in Hanwell where it's constantly disgusting. There's a lot of rubbish dumping. You can't help selfish people that do that. But the streets aren't cleaned very often. But you can walk down the road and the streets are completely pristine, and they're in a much richer demographic of an area. So people start to then feel like, well, it's a little bit of us and them, rather than the reality of your street can only be cleaned every 6 to 8 weeks, or whatever it is. So there's councillors need to be much better informed, I think, of stuff as well, and we need to take on that. But we also need the information to take on board to then relay that, and not to make excuses, but to at least kind of give some context, which has been spoken about a lot tonight. So anyway, I won't waffle on anymore. It's just a few ramblings.
Thank you for your useful contribution. I can see Joanna Sumner, you have raised your hand. Do you want to come back on any of these questions or comments?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to get in, but a sticky hand button as well to kind of respond on the point about ward forums. And obviously they've been suspended for a while, and we're looking to kind of come back with something for what we can do from the autumn for the rest of this municipal year, and interested in people's thoughts about what form that might take, because we could try out different things in the remaining kind of months of this municipal year. It doesn't have to be the same everywhere. We could do groups of wards. So any thoughts on that? And I think this panel is due to consider ward forums more generally, and kind of their role in engagement in March, if I've got that right. So we could, the panel could have a very useful contribution to the thoughts for the kind of following municipal year, if you've got some good ideas for that.
Thank you for your input, Joanna. Okay, so the next speaker is the question from Councillor Gallant.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Look, very, very briefly, actually, it's just picking up on Councillor Driscoll's point about the ward forums, and I think it looks like we're going to discuss them a lot. I agree. Few people hear about them, and even few people attend them, because it means going to a place. In even Broadway, our ward forum attendance increased because we went online and actually held them as a Zoom session, and we doubled the attendance. And I think it's, that's just, perhaps not a general example, but I think probably our work on this panel is seeing how we can unite the various forms of communication and bring them all together. And so we shouldn't consider them separately. We should consider them as one thing, contributing to each other. And so, digital communication, could be the key to having successful ward forums. That's really what I have to say on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Gallant. Yes, you're right. The communication channels are very important in order to make sure that we are engaging the wider parts of the borough. So next question from Councillor Mahmood.
Thank you, Councillor Anjum, and thank you for organising such a diverse and informative panel tonight. I'm sorry I was being late. Otherwise, I don't want to miss anything of this community engagement discussion. A couple of things I just wanted to mention that I just wanted to have some clarification from Kiran. Kiran, we always talk about community engagement and a strategy and whatever we can do it to engage the residents. So I just wanted to know, have we ever employ or outsource that responsibility to any other company to involve or engage residents? That's my first question. And how did it go? So either is it better to involve a professional people, their job is to engage the community, or do you think we can do that job better than them? That's the first thing. Second is, I heard a lot of the proposal in terms of, and I'm working as a community organizer already. So I'm just thinking about that. You said the planning process and the libraries, but I think there is a very vital community called faith community, and that is very important, especially in London, especially in Ealing. Just to let other members know, myself and leader of the council have started working closely with faith community to engage them properly and just to feel them they are the part of the community as well. So I think that's the point. You need to include that and work on that as well. And I'm happy to make your connection wherever I can. So that's two things. And the two questions from Mail. It's such an interesting presentation, Mel. I'm very impressed with your presentation, but I just wanted to know two things from you. One is, when you said you involved residents on town planning, master plan or regeneration, and you diffused the whole situation, and instead of going against the council, they would start working towards the plan, and the plan was awarded. That's a great achievement. Just wanted to know, in what stage you involved the residents? I mean, in the very beginning, where the concept was there, or when the situation was boiling? And the last thing I wanted to ask you is, I have seen your title of your presentation, and you have set some pictures, and one of the picture is front of the Ealing Council, where hundreds of people are protesting. So do you think this is the outcome of what you want to show us? You want to show us this is the outcome of poor consultation, or I just wanted to know from you? Thank you very much.
Okay, Kieran, over to you first.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So the short answer, Councillor Mahmood, to your question is we have worked with external partners on different aspects of consultation and engagement. So we've done it specifically on consultations, so where we've used market research agencies and others to work with us to survey populations, to run focus groups on our behalf and gather that insight on a particular issue. We've touched on obviously some of the outsourced sort of proprietary digital tools that we've used. The commonplace example was given. We've worked with third-party organisations to facilitate some of those areas. So, for example, the libraries consultation, and I know some members have fed back, critique or challenged that process, but we did work with external partners to facilitate some of those sessions, because we thought that would be important in terms of trying to support and boost trust and engagement of residents and voluntary sector groups who would be coming. And as Mel mentioned in her presentation, we've worked with them in terms of thinking about framing our understanding and our approach overall. So we absolutely have worked with third parties, including those in the private sector, to bring in kind of either expertise or capacity, or to act as third parties. I mean, I think ultimately, as the decision-making body and as the democratic body via yourselves as councillors, we can't outsource that bit of the the process, but I definitely think we're open and wanting to work with the innovation and the ideas which are out there. And if I could just respond also while I'm speaking, Councillor Brett made a really helpful sort of contribution on the approach, and it bore out 2 points for me. One was about the effectiveness of our communications. Do we have the right channels? Are they used by the right audiences? Do we target them in the right way to reach more marginalised groups or young people or whoever the key audience may be? And that's been something that's been really tested and developed over the last 16 months through COVID, obviously, where we've really wanted to ensure the inclusivity of our reach. I think there's a separate and related issue about the engagement. So even if we've got the best channels in the world, if we design a poor engagement process and there's not enough time, or it's not meaningful, or any of those other constraints, then I don't think we can out communicate that, no matter how good our reach is. And obviously there's a symbiotic relationship between those two things in terms of trust, usage, and engagement. So I think they will be themes which we'll probably explore with you in the later sessions as well. Thank you.
And then shall I pick up now?
Yes.
Okay, so in terms of Romsey and the town planning, the bit that when I got involved was sort of halfway through the process. So they'd done the sort of generic public consultations, the sort of first phase, I guess, of master planning and getting people's ideas and, putting some sketches together and doing some schools work, etc., and getting those things. So I worked with, it was a deliberative democracy process. It was a citizens' assembly where 50 people were randomly selected to match the sort of demographics of the area. And then we spent 5 days together. What was really interesting, and I'll give you an example, was we asked them at the very beginning, day one, what's important for your town centre? Like what would be, what would good look like? Parking, better shops, right? Parking, better shops, parking, better shops. Same stuff that had come through the public consultations, and the sketches that the planners had created were these kind of, the market centre with lots of parking behind wooden fences and all in different places, and a better Waitrose or whatever it was. By the end of the 5 days, it was absolutely not that. It was parking was nowhere to be seen. It was park and stride, park and ride, and it was about building in better, cleaning up the canal area, making the places look pretty, doing something different with the public transport. So it's really interesting how through the process of, that was a learning and deliberation process, giving people lots of different types of information, giving people information from outside the local area, blue skies thinking, what happens in other parts of the country, in other towns and cities, and giving them an opportunity to really explore that. And then, so when they came out with a different set of recommendations, that then went out to public consultation and then the process of the final plan. In terms of the picture, so I've got to be honest, right? So I was like, oh my goodness, it's Ealing. I need to get some photos of Ealing. What does Google Images give me?
Wrong picture, yeah.
I chose that one on purpose. And the reason I chose that one is because engagement isn't, I mean, you guys know it better than anybody, right? You're on the hard edge of engagement. It's not always cozy, it's not always pretty, and not everybody is happy. And it's kind of accepting that and being your best selves and being up for conversations and engagement with people who are shouting at you, and giving them the time and space that they need. So it won't always be popping to the Domino's Club in a library setting and having a conversation about X, Y, and Z. Quite often it's like that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your...
Anjum, can I come back to...
I have quite a few hands which are waiting, so I think I have to go back to them and give them an opportunity. So I can come back to you if we have a spare time. So the next one is Councillor Steed and then Councillor Anand. Councillor Steed, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, Councillor. I hope you can still, I'm still with you.
Yep.
This is just a general point, really, for Mel as much as anyone. There was a colleague of mine who always used to say, I can't remember what he used to say now, that most people are not interested in politics most of the time. And although I don't necessarily agree with that adage, it does come back to talking about politics in a way that people understand and appreciate, and sometimes picking up on those issues which are of perhaps not exactly strategic importance, but they're important to the people who live on a particular street. And I always think that, I think all councillors will have experienced this, that when you go out and you knock on doors and you say, hello, I'm your councillor, a lot of people are amazed, if that's the right word, that their councillor is actually on their doorstep talking to them. And I think I'm sure we've all experienced this, that there clearly is this disconnect, that people just think they're not involved in the process, if that's what you want to call it. But when you talk to people, you think, oh, this isn't going to be a long conversation, and you're on their doorstep for 25 minutes. So I can see Julian nodding there. Thank you, Julian. So it gets back to this issue about language and how we actually talk to residents and what issues we pick up on, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to come on that? Any comment by the officer? No? Shall we move on to the next question? Okay, Mel, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, absolutely. I guess you've always got to start with where people are at. Like, if that's the first kind of law. Like, if you're going to have a conversation, you've got to listen first, and what is it they want to say, and let them give them space to say it. And then you can often find that the conversation can change through that. I guess the other thing is how much do residents understand and get you. I think there's something about it actually starting to build two-way engagement and two-way listening and understanding and working together. So I really think it's about partnership and collaboration. Otherwise the danger is you're reinforcing, not purposefully, but almost like that dependent, paternalistic, this isn't stuff I'm not happy with, councillors, you need to fix. And you've got to try and find a way to kind of get some more equality in that relationship and partnership working.
Thank you. Now I can see 5 more hands. Are they new questions or they are the legacy ones? If you have already asked your questions, then please put them down. Otherwise, I'll come back to you in the order that I have received. So the next one is Councillor Anand.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, firstly, how, as a resident, I'll speak as a resident first, prior to becoming a councillor, I never remember receiving one notification of any ward forums. And I know also other residents that never received notification of ward forums. Then when I became a councillor, so I never actually thought they were important. And to be truth, I never attended one ward forum before becoming a councillor. That was because I never knew they even existed to that degree. And then when I did engage and get involved into politics, then I actually started to recognize that there is ward forums, there is CLP meetings, there are different sort of ways to engage. So my question is that the emails, because as becoming a councillor, I found that the ward forums were an excellent way to engage with residents. So I'm very much in favor of the ward forums, although I admit that I was not ever informed of their use before. So I feel there might be a lot of people like me that actually are not really being engaged with. And the people that reoccur in these ward forums are possibly the same people that get the same emails because they've already attended and they keep on getting those same emails. So the other people don't actually recognize. So my question really takes around is the reason why the same people attend is because they are the only one that gets those emails? Thank you.
Thank you, Parveen. Yes, officer.
Should I come back on that? I think that's probably right. I haven't been here long enough for actually war forums to be running while I've been responsible for them, but my understanding is that there is a kind of contact list and people get invited because they're on the contact list, but I'll take that away and have a look. So when we're looking at how we bring things back, how do we expand the kind of contacts and people, making sure that people know about them. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And yes, I will also add to that yes, we this is a common observation, you know, no matter which ward forum you go to, these are the same sort of people who are turning up. So somehow council is actually not getting, you know, people from different parts of the boroughs, and this is the reason why we are discussing why we cannot reach them and what are the barriers and what we can do to involve those who are not involved at the moment. So I can see the next hand raised by Councillor Driscoll and then Councillor Brett.
Thanks. Just to help Joanna out, I know that ward forums are publicised by a postcard drop. That's not for every meeting, but there is a ward-wide postcard drop for some meetings, and we do our own as well. And I think a key has been mentioned, like Councillor Steve mentioned, about the idea that interests people. If you have a topic and a theme that interests people, you get people to attend, which is not rocket science. If they're not interested in it, they won't give up their time to come along and attend. But regardless of whether it's a ward-wide postcard drop or it's our own targeted one, attendance isn't vastly variable, and it's largely the same people who are completely good-hearted and have got best intentions, and it's great, but it's often very, very the same people. Just to go back on a couple of points, I think we need to think about some sort of engagements can be different for different themes. It was interesting to hear about the Romney experience in their town centre, how they arrived on day 1 and left on day 5 with a different understanding. And I think they're probably the amount of knowledge and information and thought progress they had over that 5 days probably helped immensely. So we can't expect people to engage if we're not giving them the right amount of information. And often it's very frustrating trying to get information to residents to put it into a bigger picture, often a complex picture, and doing that in a succinct way is not often easy. I think when you've got a group of 50 where you can focus and they're there for a task and a job, and they're there for several days, great, but often you're lucky if you get them there for a couple of hours. So that's quite a challenging task. But I think it's fine to have different ways of doing things for different themes, different tasks, different options that are being considered. And that's not a problem. Looking at, I mean, just go back for ward forums. Sorry to skip back to that. I know when I first became a councillor, the first thing we were meeting with officers to just was what was the agenda? And there was a set pattern to that agenda. I think emission charging for parking was the big issue. And it quite clearly was going to be a hot topic, but I did my own PowerPoint, and I think I caused a few hearts to flutters in some officers when they saw my draft PowerPoint. But that's, I'm used to. I had a teaching background and a training background. There was no discussion with officers about how to communicate information, methods of communication, or how to engage. It was, we're at the front and we're talking, and we've got an audience that we talk to. They ask us questions and we answer. So, I mean, I tried to get my PowerPoint to be more engaging than that and give a whole context of information. So, but I think how we engage and the methods of engaging in war forums is just not discussed with councillors. We're just at the front to talk to people, and it's audience, top table, audience, top table, back and forth. But that should be part of giving councillors the confidence to deliver in a different style. I mean, I've got an education and training background, so I'm quite fine to break a group of 50 up into different groups and to go around and talk to groups of 5 and 10 and get them working differently. When I suggested that in my own ward forum, people go, oh, that means getting people to do some work. They might not like it. Well, you know, not every meeting you might do that, but some meetings for some topics, I think as councillors, we need to be able to step up and do that. And maybe some councillors need some training and some confidence to do that. So that should be good. I think we need to accept that some issues have been delivered at different speeds. I think the library's been mentioned was one example where there was a budget constraints. We had to deliver the consultation and get feedback within a certain time to complete a budget, which is not the best way of doing it. But there was a genuine intent to have meetings that were engaging and participatory, but the ones that I attended were repeatedly hijacked by the same people who shopped around at the same meetings and were just very loud, very domineering, and said the same thing at every single meeting. So there was an attempt by the council to do it in a different way, but it was swept away by the events. And I think planning has been quite an important issue. Trying to convey the complexities of planning requirements and planning law and the structures on the council is very difficult. Just because there's a planning application in doesn't mean to say the council's at blame for that planning application. We can't stop any organisation making a planning application. And we're also restricted on prejudging that planning application. But how we educate and inform and get developers to engage is really important. And that's, I think, where our role is. And I think if the developers have to give a statement of engagement when it's a larger project, but often said we've leafleted one side of a street, or we did both sides of a street because that was the neighbouring street to the development. Well, I'm sorry, that's not good enough. Just because you've leafleted once, you did 30 sheets of A4, that probably got swept up with a whole load of other leaflets, is not sufficient. And I think in terms of planning, we can have a requirement that their engagement is more meaningful. And I think that's when we need to step in. We have large developments going ahead that you can't just have one meeting for the immediate neighbourhood, and developers need to step forward and be a bit more appreciative of that. So we need to step forward in our planning requirements. But I think we need to also get through our communication, our digital communication. It's been great about COVID, but lots of other areas is just, and the LTNs I'm thinking especially, has just fallen flat on its face. And there's a reticence to get information out there, and information hasn't been provided to the council in time as well by external providers. But I think where we're doing big changes, we need to make sure we have that information. Not that we're told we can have it, we need to be able to deliver it. And that's been a disappointment with the LTNs. We haven't been able to deliver that information rapidly and quickly and in bite-sized chunks. Often in teaching, we talk about chunking it up so that people can digest information, help it to contribute to their understanding of an issue in an area. I think there's a massive amount of work, but we need to think about what are people's interests and what's going to connect to them. It doesn't have to connect with every person all the time, but how we connect with key stakeholders and users of services is crucial. I think of the reforms in adult social services. A lot of information went out in publicity and information on that. I'm less certain about how much went on in terms of engagement and direct contact. Lots of printed material. I'm less sure about how much direct contact and discussion went on with service users. And I should know that, but I don't feel confident in explaining that. So I've come to quite a range of items there, so I'll leave it there, but thank you.
Thank you so much for your very useful contribution, Councillor Driscoll. And I can see from the members' questions that they are quite keen to talk about ward forums. So let me just remind that we have a dedicated meeting for that, which is the third one. So save some questions for the third one. We will be investigating and looking into as to why we have not been able to reach the wider parts of community. What are the barriers? So we will have a lot of time for that specific meeting. So basically this first meeting is is an overview of the council's existing strategy, overall strategy on resident engagement, and how they are using the communication channels, where they are standing, where they want to go in future. So if you can ask questions revolving around that, so that we can ask officers to come back to us on that. So please just make sure that you ask the questions that have not been asked before. So next one is Councillor Brett.
Thank you, Chair. So just one thing that we probably haven't covered very much on this call is around how we evaluate. And sorry to hark on about the libraries being an example of how I personally don't think we did a very good job. We use an external agency. I actually attended one of the meetings to engage the public. And yes, I agree with Councillor Driscoll on the fact that there were particular people that did hijack and were noisy. But the majority of people that were there told them to stop because they wanted to engage in a conversation with the officers and with the then cabinet member. But what actually happened was, and I'm talking about as the receiving end of that information, was that the presentation was structured in a way that it was telling rather than informing, and it wasn't asking questions. It was basically telling people this is what we're doing, and whether you like it or not, the decision's more or less made. And when the data was questioned, because again there was different data sets used, rather than one continuous bit of data, there was lots of different data used, and so people started going, well, why are you talking about that when then on the next page you're talking about something completely different? The perception that the feeling that we got back was very much, it was that they didn't want to answer those questions, and it was dismissed. So I think so just to go to long story, but to go back to how we evaluate, how we communicate, and the fact that as an organisation, did we come away from that libraries consultation and think, oh, well, it wasn't too bad? Because as a resident at the time sitting there, I thought it was appalling. It'd be interesting to find out how we evaluate and then how we learn from things, because there's always something to learn. Even when something goes right, there's always something to learn. So then what do we do going forward so that we don't repeat the same error, potentially using an external partner again that doesn't necessarily know the lie of the land? And what also I felt was that the local councillors weren't actually engaged with at all. So that they didn't, they were there at the back in the same way that all of the residents were, which is fine. They were also residents, but there was not a level of engagement from the cabinet or from the particular outsourced company in order to communicate what the issues were. So anyway, that's. It would be just interesting from an evaluation perspective if we could.
Thank you so much, Councillor Brett, for your useful contribution. And if officers and Mel want to come back to Councillor Brett.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm happy to respond. It's Councillor Brett. I'll say up front, it's a more general response. I wasn't necessarily involved in all of the sessions, so potentially can't address all of your comments, but definitely sort of take those on board. In terms of the sort of context, I suppose, with the libraries consultation, I think Councillor Driscoll kind of mentioned that the reality of the situation was the council had the proposal was partly driven by the budget constraints, and I think probably the design of the approach was intended to be kind of open and honest about what was up for debate at that time and what wasn't, and the likely consequences for the service provision if it wasn't possible to sort of broker the community managed solution and to try and focus the dialogue on the conversation on that part, on the engagement on that. I think the organisation knew in doing that that some people didn't accept that premise that the budget needed to be or was going to be reduced, and that therefore people would sort of feel very strongly and negatively about that. And I'm sure from a sort of best practice perspective, it would been easier probably to design that process without that constraint. So I think from my recollection of that time, what the council was trying to do was position open and honestly the pressures on it in the way that members have referenced, and to sort of engage and have the dialogue in the areas where that was meaningful. I completely take on board the feedback that may not have been everybody's perception or experience of it. I mean, in terms of evaluation, again, on a number of levels, I suppose there's the volume kind of assessment of the numbers of people who engaged or responses to consultation. There's the, if you like, the qualitative or outcome assessment, which was in that scenario within some quite tight parameters. The majority of community managed libraries, we were able to secure community support for those proposals and to bring those forward. So in that sense, I think that probably was viewed as a positive outcome from that engagement within the sort of parameters that are available. So I guess that will be my overarching response. Mel or Joanna may want to comment further.
Happy to comment a little bit. Obviously, I don't know what actually happened, but the danger with these types of things when you get it a bit wrong is that is such a lingering feeling in that community, isn't it? And it sounds like overwhelmingly there was a perception and a thought that still is there, that it was disingenuine and that it wasn't really consultation, and that decision had already been made. And I think the danger is trying to work out, and Kieran mentioned about the gunning principles, and trying to work out when do you really need to do consultation and what type of consultation do you need to do. And I'll give you an example I did, which was around reducing bus subsidies in West Sussex. So they needed to reduce bus subsidies. They couldn't, austerity and all the issues it had in terms of money we're paying to some bus routes. And their first response was, we need to hold some public meetings. And so able to say, probably not actually what you need to do. What you need to do is have and understand service users first and primarily. You need to go and speak with bus users. You need to do bus user surveys. You need to understand the impact. You need to understand what routes they use and why they use them and where they cross over. You need to look at different data sets. You need to understand where people live around bus routes, what access they have to other transport, what other bus routes perhaps duplicate and do. So there's a whole piece of other data analysis, as well as bus user survey data, understanding the impact, looking at indices of deprivation to really focus on. And I did a working group, formed a working group of councillors, and we used those sort of dashboard of information to assess what would be where you could mitigate impact or actually would have very little consequence and where it wouldn't. And then that whole piece of information was then sort of set up as sort of information boards taken to libraries and just shared the whole thinking and the process in a very different way to talk about the change in that service. So I guess all I'm saying is don't always think that everything needs that big kind of public consultation, because what it's not going to come out with necessarily the outcome and the process and the relationship that you want. You need to think about things differently in that way, and it's very ingrained in local authorities to do public meeting. It's totally kind of the default position, but it's not always the best method, going back to that goal and purpose and outcome that you're trying to achieve.
Thank you so much. And it's almost 9:15 now. I'm conscious of time. I think we have had a really, really good discussion, and questions have been answered by the officers and our special expertise. So if there is any new question, I will take one more last question, but that has to be really, really quick. Is Councillor Mahmood, are you going to ask a new question?
You are very kind of you, Councillor Anjum. And just a very quick question.
Yeah.
This is exactly, Bill, I said to you, consultation for what? Consultation for value the residents' opinion, or consultation is only the tick box for engaging the residents' strategy? So these are the two things. Don't do consultation if you will not be able to value their opinion. That's otherwise the residents will not thinking they will be consulted. They will be thinking the council is not listening to them. So that's the very important point. And that is exactly happened last night in planning meeting with Councillor Grant, and Councillor Anand was there. The regeneration estate just around the corner, we have been applicant, council, and third party engaging residents since last 3 years. 3 years is a long time to engage the residents. And last night what happened, the two residents came in the meeting as an objector, and they were complaining, we never heard about that. We've never been consulted on that. So that was surprising for everyone. So 3 years, enough time to engage residents. But there is always problem with the engagement. So my point, I wanted to clarify that, is engagement for what? Engagement for values their opinion and follow what they are saying, or engagement just to engage the residents? Thank you, Chair.
Councillor
That's the
Mahmood.
quick thing.
Thank you so much for your valuable input. Now we are at the end of our agenda item 6. Now we ask panel members to consider, you have considered all the reports, you have had a good discussion, and based on that, what suggestions you would like to make for further improvements. So let's start with that. Is this a new hand, Councillor Driscoll?
Hi. Well, yes. So, I mean, I was coming on to see what the conclusion for this meeting might be. So I think it's kind of reflecting on what Mel was saying then about, there's often a rush while we're consulting, so we rush to a public meeting, when that might be relevant and appropriate for some issues, but I think actually taking stock of what is the issue, what that was being considered, and what information we have, what do we need to let people know that information that we hold, what new information do we need to gather, and often the time frame is very tight between sort of getting that, not in every issue, but some of them, the time frames may not allow a lot of time to get new information. We have what's, as it were, on the shelf. So I would like to try and think about, do we have like a suite of options for different types of consultation depending on the issue? I don't want to prescribe them here and now. I don't think I can, but I think, as we as councillors, when I think about the LTN, is we were told a whole set of information was available, and yes, it was available. It just so happened to be available, a lot of it, on the 1st of July, and the LTNs have been in place for many, many months. It was available, but 9 months down the line. So I'm just thinking, how are we going to ensure that we have a suite of consultation options that we can adopt for different themes and different issues, and that we have the resources to meet that suite of options? It's all about making sure that we do the right thing at the right time and inform people and get people involved. But often I think there's almost like a single form of engaging very often. We do a public meeting, we issue a document, it gets delivered, you had your chance to go to the public meeting, we're sending an email, but there's not a sense of dialogue. So I think we need to sort of flesh out that a bit more. I don't know if I can do it here and now, but I think we need more substance to how we're going forward with future consultations, so that we can tick all those boxes and be appropriate for
Okay,
each theme.
thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Council Friscoe. So I gather that the panel is suggesting that council looks for different ways of consultation to make the engagement more meaningful and fruitful. What other suggestion members want to make? Councillor Steed?
Forgive me if I've missed something in Kieran's presentation, but I'm just wondering about the role of some context here on, as Councillor Driscoll just said, about resources. I mean, presumably there is limited budget for this whole process, be it for, well, I know that there is for forums, but be it consultations, and being it for exploring other and possibly more effective means of communication. So there's no point in us making up some fantastic list of what we would like to see, presumably, unless we can put some kind of price list on it.
Okay, that's fine, fair enough. Yes, so I mean, based on the figure number 3, there is a mention in the report that do we adopt the LGA model to inform the deliberations, or do we have any different ideas? What does the panel think about it?
Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
I mean, I there's nothing wrong with that outline model. You know, it's aspirations of what we seek to do. I'm just thinking how we apply that model in different themes and for different subjects. So the model by itself is fine. You know, it's got a lot of merit to it. It's just the application of it. It might be different in planning, where we've got more statutory obligations than, for example, in libraries, where there is a statutory obligation, but that's much looser and less strictures on the council than a planning requirement, for example. So I think we need to adopt it, but then think about how we apply it in the different themes and circumstances.
Okay, thank you so much. Any other suggestion from any other members? No?
The only Chair, if I may, with the LGA model, perhaps I think Mel actually put it very well. Instead of perhaps seeing it as a hierarchy, perhaps seeing it more like a donut, actually, so that the outside informing is the absolute number one priority, and as you drill down into it, the very center of that donut is the actual empowerment. But each aspect is still relevant as you get down deeper into it.
Thank you so much. So, Harjeet, have you made a note of, I can see that 2 types of suggestions are coming from the panel. One is exploring ways of different types of consultation and applying the LGA model in a different themes that is fit for different communities and different forms of consultation. So that's the suggestion I'm getting. So looking at the figure, what do you think council is doing well, and I mean, what do you think we should improve further as a council? If you just check
Councillor,
engagement self-assessment metrics, the figure 3, based on the report and the presentation and all the discussion, what does the panel think council is doing well, and where do they have to do better or improve?
Councillor, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I think that there's a general consensus that the council performed well, if not very well, during the whole COVID pandemic, and I wonder whether lessons could be learned from that going forward. I mean, Kieran may have a view on this. I'm sure he does. and whether the council can make better use of the information or the data that it holds on the residents of the borough. And again, there may be legal constraints on this, I accept, absolutely. But the council seemed to get its message out pretty effectively. And maybe that was partly because of the topic and the messages that they were having to send out. But as I say, the perception is that the council performed well in getting a message out. And it performed well in contrast perhaps to how it performs, you know, pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. I don't know whether other people have that same view, but presumably there are some lessons that can be learned from that.
Thank you so much. Very quickly, yes, Councillor Brett?
Yeah, I was actually just going to agree with Councillor Steed on that. I think the council did do a really good job, but I think what they did do well is utilise community groups really, really well. And I think that that's a big lesson that needs to be learned, because I belong to one, and I'm sure lots of other people do, and they've kind of gone a bit dormant, obviously because of the pandemic is changed and evolved. But there's lots of residents and people locally that want to help and do things and make the community better. And I think that's some leverage there for us as councillors and as council of utilising those groups, but also seeing, you know, there's a whole army of volunteers there. And people that are willing to do stuff or be involved in some way, and maybe engaging with those people that seem to be a little bit further down the line of engagement might be a good approach to kind of bringing into the strategy.
Thank you so much for your input. Do you have any other suggestion, Councillor Driscoll?
I mean, I think the COVID stuff has been great, and that sort of linking in with existing organisations, brilliant. But I wonder how much of, like, I mean, Lagercan was mentioned this evening, but how many people realise that how much that is supported by the council? So the Lagercan do the picking of the litter and getting that, but then it's cleared by the council, pre-arranged, pre-organised. So I wonder how many people realise that. And the Do Something Good website was mentioned by Kieran earlier on. I looked at the website and there's not a single bit of council branding on it. Now that, I don't know why that's not there. And hardly is talk about volunteering in the London Borough of Ealing, and the contact address is Percival House, effectively the town hall, as it were. But there's next hardly any mention of the involvement of the council and Do Something Good. And if that's one of our major engagement sort of volunteering portals, then it seems a bit of a miss. It's almost like we're embarrassed to admit that we're connected with this, which I can't understand why. So in terms of explaining to people and informing the support that is offered to organisations, I think that's really missing and lacking. So we do provide it, but we don't inform people that we're offering that support.
Thank you so much. And I will quickly ask Kieran to have his closing remarks, please.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So I'll keep it brief, but it's been, it's been a good discussion. Just to respond to some of the points that have been raised there, we can certainly address some of those in the scheduled forward plan of the meetings, and we'll pick up the feedback. I think there is a real value in the theme the members were just exploring around the COVID response. It's really pleasing to hear a number of members say they felt that the council communicated differently. I think we did. I mean, obviously the clarity and the urgency of the message helped, but it's driven, and we'll explore it more, a fundamental shift in how we use email to communicate with people, a renewed look at how and when we translate material into community languages, a different approach to disseminating messages to community groups, and that's just in comms before we get on to how we worked with the voluntary sector through Ealing Together, or how we worked with residents groups. So I think there was something about the urgency and the freedom to innovate outside of normal service lines that we mustn't lose sight of, and we must sort of carry forward. So we'll definitely look to explore that with you as we move through the future panels. Thanks.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your contribution. So now we go back to our agenda, which the last item, which everybody wants to be pleased that we have successfully completed our first meeting, had a very, very good debate. So the next meeting will be held on 12th of October 2021 at 7 p.m. It will be a virtual meeting. And in this particular meeting, we will be specifically looking for council's digital channels, which includes the website and Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channels. These are the communication channels which council uses to engage with the residents. So there is a little task for all the panel members and the co-optee that please go back and in your own spare time check council's website, the homepage, the user friendliness, the appropriateness of the contents, what information you think should be there, and what works well, and what are the areas that we council can improve, and also see what communication digital channels are doing well. What do you think about it? I mean, visit the council's YouTube channel and see if it is really engaging the community, and also go to different councils, different local authorities' website and their communication digital channels, and see what is working well with them, and then compare it with Ealing's and see, you know, where do we stand and what we can gather from other boroughs' communication channels, and then how we can ensure that council is effectively using the website and the digital channel to actually you know, relay the message, and then, you know, take the input and feedback, and then eventually that is, you know, taken on board when we make policies and when we deliver services to our residents of all communities. So basically this will be very helpful if you can please do this in your own time. So that's the end of the meeting now. Thank you, everyone. Mel, thank you very much for your participation, and thank you very much, Baljit, and thank you very much, officers. We will see you soon in the next meeting. So everyone have a good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nana.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.